Okay, I'd like to call the Environmental Matters Committee meeting to order. Note for the record, in attendance are committee members Alderman Arnett and Alderman Savage, and we're joined by Alderwoman O'Neill and several staff members. The first item is an approval of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda as written, please say aye.
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 Okay, first item of business is the election of the chair pursuant to City Code 2.16.120. Do we have a nomination for chair?
I nominate Karma O'Neill. I'll nominate Alderman Savage for chair.
You can second that even though it's for yourself.
The second.
Okay. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of...
I do have discussion. I would like to keep him chair until he gets it right.
We need some standards by which to measure that.
That's right.
I think he's been doing quite a good job.
So, okay, then all in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, so at this time, I will turn over the chairmanship of this committee to the newly elected chair, Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Thank you, Alderman Arnett. All right, looking forward to another 4 years. And with our new member, I'd like to welcome to the committee, Alderwoman Finlayson. Look forward to bringing in your experience to the committee.
Well, thank you. I did request this committee. I believe in growth.
Good. And I know you do work with the Chesapeake Bay program, and so it'll be good to bring
LGAG.
that. Yeah. LGAG. Yeah.
LGAG, Local Government Advisory.
All right. So moving on, we have 3 appointments and reappointments to go through. First of all, we have AP 6-22, appointment of John Henry Turner, Jack Turner to the Annapolis Conservancy Board. Was he able to join us, Ms. Raftovich?
Unfortunately, we notified the folks that were supposed to come before you in council chambers today.
Oh, no. Okay.
So, and at the last minute sent them the notification that the meeting was moved to online. So I do have Mr. Browning is available and he's online. He's here in the building, but I have him on a computer. And I know Miss Yancey, who is also supposed to be before you today, is ill. So I'm happy to speak on behalf of the 2 people who are not present, or I can reschedule them to the next meeting.
Okay. Well, let's start with the appointment of Mr. Browning to the Conservancy Board then, since he's here. That'd be AP-8-22, the appointment of Patrick Browning to the Annapolis Conservancy Board. So, Mr. Browning, if you could, we have your application and resume, and if you'd be willing to give us a bit of a statement about what has interested you in volunteering to serve on the Conservancy Board, and maybe go over a little bit what your background is.
Yeah, sure. Well, nice to meet each of you. I currently live in Ward 3, moved there in about March of 2019, and really just wanted to get involved with the city of Annapolis. My background is in law. I practice commercial real estate in primarily Montgomery County is where my office is, but all throughout Maryland, actually all throughout the nation. And in that work, I've touched on some easement work and some conservation work related to some developments that I've been a part of. But I thought this board might be a good way for me, to give back to our community in terms of providing what I've learned so far in my short legal career in terms of commercial real estate, and also help preserve and conserve the area for my kids and their kids, hopefully, for this area, because I enjoy the water very much here and recreationally, and I hope to continue that. So that's kind of why I wanted to join this board, and a little bit about me.
Well, thank you. And I think as, I used to staff that Conservancy board years ago, and I know it'll be good for them to have somebody with a legal background. They do have assistance now and then from the law office, but I think it'd be good to have somebody on the board. So it looks like you'll be a great fit for the board. And so you're prepared to meet. I think they meet once a month in the evenings for a couple hours. You're prepared to make that commitment?
I'm prepared to make that commitment, yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your interest and serving. And are there any questions from my colleagues on the committee? Alderwoman Finlayson or Alderman Arnett?
I'll share your observation that this looks like a very good fit, and we're always happy to hear that people want to volunteer to give back to the community. So I certainly am favorably impressed.
I do have a question. Mr. Browning, did you say you are new to the city of Annapolis? Did I hear you say you just moved here in 2019?
March of 2019, correct.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm from Columbia, Maryland. I moved in March 2019 to Annapolis. My parents have a place here at the Tecumseh downtown in Eastport. So I've been familiar with coming to Annapolis for many years and enjoyed it, but relatively new resident.
Okay, well, you kind of answered my question because I was going to ask you how you acquainted yourself with Annapolis, but if your parents live in Eastport, then I understand. So yeah. Thank you. Thank you for stepping up and volunteering.
Yes, thank you.
And have you had an opportunity to look at the Conservancy boards? I believe online they have a list of all of their easements that they manage.
I've taken a quick look. I haven't delved into it, but yes, I've also tried to look at some of their prior minutes to see kind of what's coming up on their agenda. But I'm looking forward to meeting them and kind of getting to review more of that stuff. I haven't fully delved into all of those.
Yeah, good. And one of their biggest projects, I believe, recently has been working on their Greenway Plans. So they've been working with staff to put together, because we haven't had a Greenway Plan. I guess we had some semblance of one back in 2007, but it's been a while. So I think incorporating, the plan is to try to incorporate this into the comprehensive plan that staff is working on now. So it's a good time to jump on board, because I don't think they've finished their report on that yet. So maybe we'll see you again when it comes time to give an update to the committee. And that reminds me, Ms. Raftovich, could you reach out to, or Ms. Green, the Conservancy board in a few, maybe the next meeting or the meeting after, just get an update from the Conservancy board on what their plans may be for the next 4 years. I think it'd be good for us to hear as we put together our plans.
Yes, I think they're in the process of trying to reschedule. They had to cancel their meeting last week. So
okay. And I also, Mr. Browning, just want to apologize for the confusion over attendance today. It was kind of a quick shift we made, decided to go virtual.
Hillary got me this computer really quickly, so I appreciate it.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we recommend favorably on Mr. Browning's appointment to the Conservancy board.
I'll second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Browning.
Thank you very much.
Yep. And as far as the other two appointments, they also look very, very, very good. But I do want to try to stick with the practice of trying to get people in attendance. And for Ms. Raftovich, I think even if they could do it virtually, hopefully it'll be easier for them now if they know it's virtual. We can get them on the next agenda. But I also think just a phone call would be good. Phone call, kind of quick interview. Because, you know, I know we've said this before, but I guess for the public's benefit, I think it's good to do this just to make sure people are willing to make the commitment. And not to, I mean, I know both of them personally, but especially Mr. Turner, and he's in my ward, but I still want to try to adhere to the process if we can. And my colleagues have any other thoughts on that? Or is that
I agree. They both look good.
Mr. Chair, I agree that they should come before the committee, especially if they're first-time appointments. Something different if they're reappointments. But going to Mr. Browning, who's still with us, he should know that his name will be brought before the full council at the next meeting, but you will not be required to attend. Of course, you can always attend our meetings whenever you prefer, but you will not be required to come before the full council. But our recommendation will go to the full body.
Thank you very much.
So,
And I'll reschedule the other two for your next meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
thank you.
And we will be, I guess our next meeting will be, if I have my math correct, I think about 3 weeks out, because this is a special meeting, so it's not going to be our usual day. But thank you, Mr. Aftovich. All right, moving on, we have, so I guess we're going to take no action on AP 7-22 and AP 6-22. Moving on, we have committee discussion about Parkside Preserve project. And I actually added this on the agenda before we had the pollution that left the site yesterday or the day before. But, so if there's somebody from Department of Public Works, I thought it'd be good to get an update, or from other staff to get an update from them on what may have happened, because the photos were sent out to my colleagues to see the damage that was done. So just want to get an update.
Mr. Chair, I see the director on. Mr. Johnson is with us.
Mr. Johnson, would you like to, thank you for joining us. Would you like to give an update on what's going on with this project?
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Alderman. Let's say back a bit. On Friday, we had a meeting following the last week's committee meeting. We had a meeting with the senior management of Reliable to talk about, the ongoing concerns along Annapolis. Excuse me, I was at a dental appointment and my phone isn't working properly for the Annapolis Neck Road. Thank you. Annapolis Neck Road. And in addition to just revised things that we wanted done on site to sort of address, the long-standing issues that this project has posed for the city and for, the stakeholders in general. And sort of just, if I could just go over what we discussed, is that okay?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay. So it seemed like there are three main areas of concern that we wanted them to focus on. We wanted Annapolis Neck Road to be kept in a heightened state of good housekeeping. That meant, a lot of the concerns that showed like gravel in the gutter pans, the sweeping and other issues, we wanted those addressed. And they were currently working on that. They were milling the road to sort of put in a bit more permanent patching, not permanent patching, but better patching. And figured they had about 2 weeks left on that to get that completed. And then secondly, on the site itself proper, some of the more heavily traveled routes were exhibiting, you could see the tracks of the tracked equipment. So the feeling was that we wanted better stabilization. And then we also asked them to provide us with a weekly report of their work progress, so that we can see areas that are final and that have achieved final stabilization, areas that are currently being worked on in the current week, and then projected work and work completed. So that way we'd have a clearer picture of where concentrated activity, production activity is occurring on the site, as on a sort of contemporaneous basis, a weekly basis. We could actually see what is going on. We also did raise the concern with them that we were not very satisfied with their inspector, the person doing their NOI inspections. That's because a lot of the issues that our staff are pointing out, the stormwater inspector, environmental inspector, and the stormwater engineer are pointing out, are things that their NOI inspector should be on top of. We really, when our inspectors go to the site, they should not be finding items that they're finding. They shouldn't be pointing out to the contractor, you need to do this, that, and the other, right? I mean, there may be the odd case where something is needed, but not to the degree to which it is occurring. So the meeting was, was a positive meeting. They kind of agreed that they would move forward with implementing what we asked about, and then do an investigation on the inspector. And they felt that at some point, they did mention that they might consider assigning that to the superintendent on the site, who is a more experienced construction professional. They were to get back to us with how they would sort of remedy that concern. In addition, with the pending winter storm that we had, we instructed them to lower the water in the silt trap number 7, which is the problematic track adjacent to Quiet Waters Park. And we were told by the grading manager, who was the former superintendent, who's now the grading manager, that he would be performing that work on Saturday. They would begin to pump down on Saturday in preparation to add additional volume as the storm appeared to move from a frozen precipitation to a regular precipitation event. So I was a bit shocked, to be honest, when I received the photographs from the riverkeeper showing a discharge from the site. I was quite shocked by that, because had the trap been pumped down as they were instructed, they would have had adequate storage, and that we had found that was a way to sort of ameliorate that. But I did ask, Monday being a holiday, I did direct the staff to perform an inspection on Tuesday when they're back at work, and to sort of ascertain deficiencies on site, as well as to figure out exactly where the discharge came from. And I was just getting caught up because as I mentioned, I had a medical appointment this morning. But it appears as if they had a breach in the silt fence, which caused discharge to leave the site. And it was not clear whether or not material left the silt pond, the silt basin. They couldn't really ascertain whether or not the discharge came from that, but they could see that it did breach the silt fence. And they were written citations for that, for on-site conditions as well as for the breach. And that's where we are currently with what occurred.
Well, thank you, Director, for the update. And so if a field correction notice, you said, was issued?
It was issued, yes. I think it was forwarded. I'm not sure if they forwarded it to you.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance. I've taken a quick look at it. I'm not sure if it was sent out to the committee yet. I haven't had time to check that, but
pardon me if I could think that we incorporated your suggestion from the last meeting, where the field correction order is now a separate document. It's not just embedded into the report. The report is prepared, and the field correction order is an appendage to the report.
Okay.
A separate document.
Yeah, great.
Right. So I saw the report and I skimmed through it. I didn't have a lot of time before this meeting and other than what I was in before. I skimmed through it and I saw that as well as the field correction report that was done today and sent, posted in e-track it and then emailed to Deputy City Manager Guile.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for the update. I have a few comments and I'll open it up to the committee, but just to let people know, we don't have a huge amount of time. We have until 4:30. We do legislation I'd like to discuss. So I'm going to try to be general with some of my comments, but I think as everyone here, I'm sure agrees, and from all the departments, and like you said, Director, we're all shocked and disappointed to see the runoff happen. And just based on looking at the photos that were included by the inspector, it does look like the contractor was not doing everything they should have or could have. So I'm glad to see that field correction notice was issued. And I think City Manager said that a stop work order was issued until everything gets fixed.
I didn't see no, we did not issue a stop work order. I think 2 citations were issued. That's what.
No stop work order.
No stop work order was issued, but 2 citations were issued for, I think it was $1,000 a piece.
Why was no stop work order issued?
Deputy City Manager Guile, could you say you're in the meeting where you guys might have discussed that? I was not present and able to attend that meeting.
So there were 4 items, field correction notices were issued to be corrected by today. They had the entire day today. They will be inspected tomorrow, but they did not issue stop work orders. They just said that they had to be done. So if that means that this has happened before where the city inspectors issued field correction notices that required 24-hour turnaround, they have to throw everything they have at it to make it happen, depending on how many corrections there are, and it amounts to a stop work order. So sometimes the inspectors will just say it'll amount to it, so we're not going to do a stop work order. That's up to Department of Public Works, how they handle that. And then there were 3 other items which they were given until, I'm looking at it right now, to be completed by January 19th. That involves stabilization of stockpiles. I think they were given additional time on those due to temperatures that had frozen the ground, and therefore it was more difficult to do the stabilization. So they were given additional time to do that.
Okay. Well, just regarding the stop work order, it's a bit disappointing because I thought I recall being told that was going to happen, but just relating my own professional experience when we used to issue stop work orders readily if we saw a site in such disrepair, because it does send a clear message that this is top priority, sediment control, and that we're not going to lift it until the site has been brought back up to standards and code and specifications. And we've seen this. This is now the 3rd, 4th time, I've lost count, we've had an incident like this. And the contractor, I think I've asked before, is what, and it sounds like, I guess, from Deputy City Manager, that the point when stop work order would be issued under the current policy would be if they failed to comply with field correction notice. Now, I guess part of the problem which we had earlier was the field correction notices, the contractor was given 3, 5, 7 days to comply with things that, as I've stated before, is some things that they're required to do every single day per our code, yet they were being given 5, 7 days. As recently as, I think, last week on things. So I was a bit concerned to see that them still being given such a huge amount of time, but I'm glad to hear that for this most recent round of issues that they were given a short turnaround.
Yes, Alderman. I think that from what I saw, and I skimmed it, that most of them were to be fixed today, and then one I think was tomorrow, if my memory is correct. I skimmed it quickly. So they basically then have to deploy resources to address those today.
Yeah,
and one is tomorrow, I believe. Is to be completed.
2 are tomorrow. Like 2
are tomorrow. Okay.
Yep. On the stock sales.
Okay. And that's so now if those are not complied with, as you mentioned, at that point we would then just stop the job until that is addressed. But I believe that was the thinking in it that was done.
Okay. Well, what I do want to point out, because when I was looking at the inspection reports from the 12th and the 14th, the inspectors did give orders, corrective orders, and the contractor did not adhere. He didn't even meet the timeline that was adhered to, yet the inspectors did not issue a stop work order. They just issued the same order again and again. So it seems like they haven't quite incorporated that practice of utilizing the stop work order. So, I'm trying to think the best way to say this, but I mean, I would just, I guess, encourage the staff to look at utilizing the stop work orders more readily. I'm not quite sure what the hesitancy is behind using them. They were very effective. They're utilized by code enforcement very effectively. And it's clear this contractor has not gotten the message since we've had so many issues. And just to that point, I think one of the things we've seen is a lot of these minor issues which just pile up out at this site. And one of them being, the stabilization of the travel lanes, which I'm glad to hear are being addressed. And some of the small things like silt fence maintenance or inlet protection, that kind of thing. Small things, but they add up and they contribute to this general malaise of the contractor of not paying attention to these issues. So, I'm incredibly disappointed in the contractor. And I hope if there's anything we can do to help support staff to bring them into full compliance and to get the message, I'm sure we're happy to do that. And I think that's all I have to comment on at the moment. I don't know if either of my colleagues have any questions or comments.
I just want to do a quick recap for Alderwoman Finlayson. We have been working on this and in my view, made huge progress in many regards. Director Johnson has come up with an automated checklist that incorporates photographs. At our meeting last week, we agreed everybody needs to be time stamping their photographs so we have a sense of when these different pictures are taken and a better feel for how that integrates with the project. And we're doing now a summary at the end of the field checks of actions to be taken and a timeline to be associated. So we do have this unfortunate thing that happened over the weekend, and it does sound like we're getting on top of it. But we also, I think, is fair to characterize, been really making great strides in improving the process. So hopefully this project will move along more smoothly as it proceeds. And I think this puts us in good shape when we hit a couple of other big projects, most notably, it's always Crystal Springs to me, Providence Point. But I think moving forward, we really have much stronger systems in place. There's more details, but I think that's enough for right now as far as an update.
Well, I do have, I guess, somewhat of a question. And it's for my clarification. I'm glad to hear that Director Johnson has put a process in place, and I look forward to seeing that process. I guess my question is there a template, for lack of a better description, that says if this is the infraction, this is the reaction to that infraction. Because what I heard today was inspections are done and the developer is given X number of days to, or a week, if that's the case, to repair. And then the next step is, and that's my question, is there, the first infraction, this is the repercussion. The second infraction, this is the repercussion. When does a stop work order fit into that process? And is that process shared exclusively with everyone? The inspectors who are responsible for administering it, the developers who are responsible for adhering to it. And you get my point, or do you?
Alderwoman, we do not have it structured in that very formal way, but it is a good idea to do that. It's something that we will develop and use, because that would make it really clear to all parties concerned and stakeholders as well, as that really we're following a sort of like a consistent way of enforcing the aspect of the code that we're responsible for enforcing. So that's a good idea, and I will make sure that is implemented, developed, and instituted.
Alderwoman, to add on to that, Director Johnson and I, when we were addressing the site a couple of months ago, we discussed this idea of this more advanced checklist that he's using. And then last week we talked about the summary. But a second piece of what we discussed when he was formulating that checklist idea was a protocol for the Department of Public Works to follow in just the regard that you were discussing. What happens when X happens and then when Y happens. And in doing so, it'll not only be more transparent to the public and something that the developer can anticipate happening, but also it provides support to the inspectors so that they feel that they know that their director supports them issuing citations or stop work orders at a certain point in the process, or better said, when certain things happen. And so that was a second piece of what Director Johnson was going to do to improve the performance of developers.
Well, I am glad to hear it. It's, it is more than giving staff cover. It's to give them the guidelines to follow.
Yes.
And with them knowing what the repercussions are and the developer knowing what the repercussions are, that just seems, in my mind, to eliminate a lot of confusion and going back and forth with, how many days, what's the repercussion for likewise. So I think I've made my point. So thank you.
It provides consistency.
Well, thank you, Alderwoman. It's a good idea, a good suggestion. And you're already bringing something to the committee, so thank you. I one other suggestion would be if there's any kind of concern about taking a more aggressive approach is to talk with the Deputy City Manager and Office of Law, because just to throw out there, I said this to the City Manager as well, is that, years ago, we did take a more aggressive approach and we lost 0 cases and certainly issued a lot of fines and field correction notices. And again, lost none of them. We had 1 fine reduced. So if it's a matter of being gun shy about, and especially with this contractor is probably going to take us to court no matter what we do. So we might as well do as much as we can. But that's, so anyway, thank you for the update. I'm glad to hear that the field correction notices have been issued, fines have been issued. So still concerns about stop work order, but we'll see. Hopefully they'll get things resolved tomorrow and this will work out. But is there anything else anybody would like to add on this topic before we move on? All right, hearing another, I guess we'll close discussion for ID 122. And thank you. And I guess the director, you'll have to stick with us a little longer for IDE, if you could. Thank you. The next item up is 03821, which is ordinance for illicit discharges and connections for stormwater. And I thought a good way to start this, Mr. Director, would be if you could provide just an overview for those who may not be familiar with this program in terms of what is the IDD program, why is it required, and why is this legislation come before us?
Okay, so I'd be glad to do that. Hold on. So in the state of Maryland, the U.S. Clean Water Act is enforced through what is called the MS4 program, which is a permitted program. MS4 is an acronym which stands for Municipal Storm Separate Sewer Systems. It's really your storm sewer conveyance system, and it addresses non-point pollution. It's not, which is different. The distinction being point pollution would be if I were to sort of just take a pollutant and plop it into, a body of water. That's a point source, but a non-point could gather it from a fairly large watershed and it would concentrate itself naturally and sort of foul the water body. So this here is designed to prevent that from occurring. So the way that the permit is set up, they have 6 what are called minimum control measures, which are benchmarks that the permittee is required to make progress in over each permit period. And MCM 1, minimum control measure 1, is public education and outreach. And that is where you're sort of like using a way to sort of inform the public of, what they should or shouldn't do pursuant to, to polluting. There's public participation and involvement, and that's often done where you might garner stakeholders to perform stream cleanups and other forms of inlet stenciling and things like that. Things that sort of like allow the public to sort of really participate in helping to control pollutants. And then MCM 3, which is what the ordinance pertains to, is illicit discharge detection and elimination. And the illicit discharge is really that in your storm sewer, in your sanitary sewer systems, if you were to say flush something down the toilet, the water goes, the waste goes to a treatment plant, which treats the effluent for a reasonable battery of chemicals. It doesn't treat it for everything. And then it eventually would sort of like discharge fairly pure water back into the surface water bodies. For stormwater, on the other hand, there is no treatment. It's collected by the inlets, the catch basins at the side of the roads, and it flows with whatever it has collected to the surface water bodies. So it could carry pollutants. So what this MCM requires is that the municipality have in place procedures for eliminating illicit discharges. That is, discharges of materials that really would damage the surface water bodies. So if someone were pouring oil or cooking oil or spent motor oil or something else into your catch basins, or some other kind of like acidified liquid or too alkaline liquid, that you would have some way to sort of catch that. If there's dry weather flows, like we all know when it doesn't rain, you shouldn't really have water pouring out of the catch of an outlet from the stormwater, the outfalls from the stormwater system. But if you did observe that, that's an indication that you do have some kind of a connection that is inappropriate, that is not really as it was intended. So the purpose of the ordinance is to allow city staff to enter on and to sort of cure those defects that are found. And this is part of the entire stormwater program that, we are permitted and spend a lot of money to sort of comply with, to keep the Chesapeake Bay's health, and our surface water bodies in good order. This was done first because we are sort of working internally in Public Works on an IDDE manual, which the city did not have one hitherto. And this legislation is needed to allow our inspectors to sort of discharge the responsibilities under that particular manual. We are also taking, just to broaden what I'm saying a little bit, a comprehensive look at the entire stormwater program that the city has. And there are areas where further legislation may be needed. And certainly a lot of staff training is needed. For a lot of our operating departments do not have stormwater pollution prevention plans. They don't have that. And many of the staff are not currently trained or not even clear that they've ever received any distinct training on stormwater pollution prevention. And that's a big deal to sort of mitigating the effects of non-point pollution. Because there are eyes and ears out in the right of way as they travel about on their travels doing their work. And if they are unaware of what is something that's inappropriate, they're not ever going to be able to report it or to mitigate it, help to mitigate it. In addition, a lot of the work that they deal with can pollute the environment. For instance, in Public Works, we deal with the road salts. Which is while it's essential for keeping roads safe, it is in insufficient concentration, it is a toxin. So you want to have good housekeeping practices for that. We deal with oils and lubrication, transportation, fire, any operating division has that. Again, that's something that staff in those respective divisions have to be, or departments have to be aware of, trained on, and exercised on, so that we sort of discharge our responsibilities to keeping the waters of the Chesapeake Bay in good order. And I think I'll stop at that point, but that's really why we put forward that piece of legislation. Don't know if there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Director. And I think it's great that this has been introduced. It is, just to clarify for my colleagues, this is brand new code. We don't currently have an IDD, a specific IDDE section, and it's definitely about time that we've had it. So I'm very happy that this has been introduced. The only thing I do want to throw out there is, and I do have a number of amendments I'll bring up after we get general questions out there. One thing I do want to suggest or throw out there, directors, is always feel free to send legislation to myself or even the committee before it's introduced. Well, maybe not the committee, because then we might have open meetings issues, but you're always welcome to send it to me if so we can get some comments and revisions done before introduction. I've done that before with planning and zoning for some of the critical area changes that we did a few years back. But in any case, I'm very glad this has been introduced. I think it'll be a good addition to our code. I also want to clarify for the committee that point out the fiscal impact, that there is no fiscal impact to this legislation unless we do determine that we need to add more staff. And I guess at that, I'll just open it up to the rest of the committee if anybody has any overall questions about this or specific questions about this legislation. I see Alderman Arnett's hand.
I'll defer to Alderwoman Finlayson if
Alderwoman.
Well, my question for Mr. Johnson was, this is a pretty comprehensive piece of legislation. Are you taking this from a federal document that outlines MS4 certifications?
Yes, Alderman. This is based off the model code that the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has.
That's what I couldn't get out of my mouth. The EPA. Yes.
So they have developed this for all states to follow, but each region has the ability to tweak it to their particular geography or conditions, and that's what we based it on.
Okay, that was what I was trying to say, the EPA, but for some reason my lips didn't work right. So anyway, I'm pleased. And I guess my only other question, I know the amendments haven't been introduced yet, but I would just, like your take on how these amendments would impact that original EPA legislation.
We'll go through each of them, and the director will have opportunity and the law office to chime in. So we definitely want to hear from everybody. I mean, these were just, unfortunately, hot off the press. I just finished them early this morning. Any other general questions or specific for the Alderman Arnett?
So I did have the same question Alderwoman Finlayson had. I prefer to say Sheila, but I guess we're being
Please
formal. Which was, where did these come from and how much latitude do we have to change it? But drilling down just a little bit from there, I was having a hard time figuring out exactly who is the enforcement authority. I'm presuming that it's DPW, but this is apropos of conversations that Alderman Savage and I were involved in earlier today. But it seems that the devil is in enforcement, not details. And so in speaking about the fiscal impact, I'm wondering if this is going to have any meaning, Director Johnson. Do you have the staff to not only look at compliance, but also to deal with enforcement issues? I mean, if we're finding somebody dumping cooking oil from a restaurant into the storm drain, who goes out and gets after that? And what other duties do they have to forego if they're getting involved in that? So I'm not a believer that any new legislation comes with no cost. I think there is costs, and I think that it is either in the form of staff not being able to do other things because they're doing this, or we need more staff to get into compliance issues. That was a softball.
Oh, you're right. Means we're getting more people. I like it. We could always use more people, but I think though that really the way that we that the program is set up is that it has a triaging phase in it, that because dependent on what is being dumped, like if someone reports that someone is dumping some kind of a chemical or liquid, we don't quite know if that chemical is noxious, if it's toxic in some other way. That so my thought was, and I spoke with Director Simmons about this, that we don't really want the wrong staff responding to the complaint. Like public works guys don't have the training for hazardous material, turnout gear, or any of the PPE that would allow them to safely respond to that. So the first responder to a complaint like that would be the fire department. They do have the hazmat training, they do have the turnout gear and so on like that. And then if it is something that is more appropriate for Public Works to address, then Public Works would be the agency that would sort of take the ball and sort of deal with the enforcement of that. But the fire department can also cite people for, like if someone dumped gasoline or motor oil or something like that, or toluene or something into the water, into the catch basins, they would be the ones who would respond to that and address it accordingly. They'd be the right agency. And I think that is ensconced in the Annapolis Emergency Operations Plan. We just did an exercise on that a few weeks ago, and one of the what are called appendices and the appendices. I might be calling it the wrong name. Sort of addresses that exact triage chain as to who is the right agency to respond to a particular complaint. But a bigger point, if I would, I'm in the process right now of rewriting the city's, fundamentally the city's stormwater and ESC codes. That's an exercise I'm undertaking. And coming out of that is likely that we would probably need, I could use another ESC inspector or stormwater inspector. But I'm not at the point where I can defend that ask, I don't believe, because if I were questioned, I don't really have the structure in place, the legal structure in place to sort of justify that. So that might be something in the future that I was thinking. That was my thinking, to be honest, about it. I don't, because the legislation isn't ready. It's going to take some work to get it ready. But following that, we would then be in a position to see what the staffing requirements are to enforce what we've written. That was how I was looking.
Yep. All right.
But thank you for your offer.
Well, I think we can write wonderful code, but if we don't enforce it, doesn't have any meaning. So that's been my mantra, and I'll let Alderwoman Finlayson speak for herself. But all of these things require people to carry it out, and we shouldn't ignore that when we pass legislation.
Alderman Arnett, in the past, when we received complaints about oil on the street, strange colored liquid in the alley, suspected restaurant dumping something out of the kitchen, we always contact the stormwater engineers, but there has not been this code for enforcement and no fines issued. It's rather, try to catch someone doing it and tell them not to do it so it doesn't go in the storm drain. And it's been the stormwater engineers, because whatever's usually put on the street ends up in the storm drain and then into the water. So this is really a needed piece of the code.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's very, very impressive.
Yeah, and a quick side note, Director, I'm also working on an update to the sediment control code. Hopefully we can come together. I will send you what I have once I'm finished my initial draft before introduction. So maybe we can get on the same page with some of the changes to propose. I'm not touching the stormwater code yet, but that's probably going to be a separate project. I don't know if but anyway, we can talk about that in the future. We only have about half an hour left. I'm not sure we'll be able to finish this, but we'll, I guess, get started. And to Alderman Arnett, your point, if you look at page 2, line 42, it does establish a definition for authorized enforcement agency, which means employees or designees of the director of the Department of Public Works. So they're going to be the primary agency with assistance from the other departments, as the director mentioned. So I agree with the primary, but I was wondering if there isn't also a role for code enforcement. And then I was happy to learn the director saying that if it looks like it's a hazardous material, that we're involving our hazmat people, which are the right people. So I think this is actually bigger than just DPW. They certainly have the lead, but there's going to have to be a coordination and a team approach. It certainly is. I mean, in my day job, I just had actually a project we'll probably finishing tomorrow, which is an IDD complaint that came through the IDD program for the sediment discharge through the outfall. And so that's actually something I'm working on in that case. But in any case, the point is it does involve every department, inspections, permits, and code enforcement. In any case, moving on, I did send a copy of the proposed amendments that I put together for this legislation to everybody on this call, I believe. And I would like to start going through some of them. Some of them are just simple kind of corrections. Some of them are technical corrections. Some of them are just spelling errors. And then some of them are more content related. So first of all, everybody have access to this document? Who wants access, I guess?
and I reviewed all of your changes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I guess we might as well. Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So for number one, you'll see on the left there, top left, page 2, line 30. This is just, I think, a technical correction, but I need to clarify with the director and the Office of Law. But if you look at page 2, line 30, I think that's supposed to be non-stormwater and not stormwater, because they're concerned about program's concerned about non-stormwater discharges, not necessarily stormwater, because that's what it's intended to convey stormwater. So can I get clarifications from staff if I'm accurate with this?
Not sure about that. Can you? I'd have to take a look at the actual document. It's a little clunky here. See me 1 minute.
Sure. As you'll see up above in the paragraph under at line 21, it mentions how non-stormwater discharges and how the purpose is to provide general welfare through regulating non-stormwater discharges. And so for A, it's talking about regulating contribution of pollutants to the storm system.
Yeah, I think it's a typo. I think it is a typo. Yes, it should be non-stormwater. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and what is the committee's desire? Do you want to do these individually or as a block?
If we're going to go through them individually, then I think we should probably act on them individually. I do have a question about this first one. So where in line 30?
Right at the beginning before stormwater.
So
it becomes non-storm.
Read to the city separate non-stormwater sewer system MS4.
Right.
Okay, not after by. It comes at the beginning.
Right.
Okay.
And if the law office or department have any concerns about any of these amendments, after you do more analysis, please let us know. We can adjust this when it comes back to the council. But Alderman, sorry, I interrupted. Alderman Arnett.
Well, in the interest of time, I was wondering if we could hit big issues, and that it doesn't seem like we're going to finish this today, that this go back to the director and to the Office of Law. I saw a lot of simple edits, like the next one is also a simple edit, follows instead of follow. But there's some other bigger ones, like striking whole lines 28 through 32, that I think are more germane to try to sort through.
Makes sense to me. Alderwoman, what are your thoughts?
I'm good with that. I'm good with that, because I really believe that director should have an opportunity to see these and be able to let us know what are, concerns for him.
So, yeah, like the alderman said, the first two are more technical corrections. And I'm sorry, well, yeah, just grammatical, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
But question number 3 is a question that would like clarification on. So if you look to page 3, line 13, it talks about how it's the definition for construction. How construction means any activity that is subject to NPDES construction permits. But then it says NPDES stormwater phase 2 permits will be required for construction projects that result in land disturbance. But just want clarity, because my understanding was the phase 2 permits are part of the MS4. That's part of our municipal permit, and that's separate from the NPDES permit that's required for the construction process. I think those are 2 different documents or permits. And I don't think there's a phase 2 for construction permits, is my point. So this, I think, unless there's an answer today to the Alderwoman's point, I think this is something that staff may need to take back and look at to determine.
Yeah, so that would be very helpful to sort of look at it and sort of be able to give responses if that, if the committee is okay, if you're okay with us approaching it that way. I don't really just want to answer off the cuff, so to speak, on some of these items.
Okay.
I mean,
well,
if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, there's no rush on this legislation. Let me go through the list though, see if there's anything else we could bring up now as to kind of set up for more discussion. And again, we don't have to decide on these today. We'll just treat this as kind of introduction. Let me see here.
Well, the next one's pretty important. You're talking about dropping lines.
Well, number 4, amendment number 4, which is page 3, lines 28 through 32. It's a definition of field correction notice, but that term is not actually used anywhere in this legislation, nor is it used actually anywhere in our code. So it's kind of a definition without purpose at the moment. So just wanted to get at some point more clarification in terms of what the thinking was behind introducing this.
Okay. That
definition. I mean, I think it could be good, but if it's incorporated someplace into the legislation, because right now it doesn't do anything. Number 5, 6, and 5 and 6 are technical. 7's technical. Page 4, line 38. So this is number 8, amendment number 8. This would just add coal tar pavement products as a list of get my lines
prohibited items.
Yeah, so it'd be yes, you're correct. So as a pollutant, as a prohibited item, because that's already included. That was added by the previous, well, not the previous council, but a previous council about 7 years ago, to add a ban on the use of coal tar products. But I thought it'd be good to include that in this, since it's essentially an illicit discharge.
Okay.
Let's see. 9 is kind of technical.
10 is substantive. It has a whole new definition.
Yes. So this definition comes from MDE's definition. Actually, comes from the definition that MDE uses in their sediment control statute from Maryland Code and from COMAR, not the statute, sorry, COMAR. And so I like this definition. I think it's pretty strong, and I think this would be, I'll also put this in there because we have a definition of pollutant on page 4, line 36. And what made me think of this is the definition of pollutant mentions pollution, but there's no definition of pollution in this section of code. There is in 1704, but the one in 1704 isn't that great either. So anyway, I thought it'd be good to put this in here to just
likes it.
Somebody is burning up my phone.
And then number 11 is not substantive. 12 is...
I think it's a misreference, though. I think it is line 2 11. Where Allie should go.
Let me see. Page
5.
5, line 4. Good luck.
Well, that's a minor thing. We've got more substantive.
Minor. I mean, it's not, I think it'd be important to include alleys just for, we have a number of them in the city. I mean, they may be included elsewhere, but in any case, number 12 is putting a definition of receiving waters, because there is not one currently.
And did this come from the Clean Water Act definition or the EPA's definition? Or where did
No, I don't believe. I think this is one I put together.
Okay.
It just includes what would be considered receiving waters. So basically any kind of stream or wetland system or other resource identified by the department. Because receiving waters is used in the legislation currently, but there's no definition. So I think it'd be good to put something in there. Let's see. Number 13 is, page 5, line 43. So this is a section dealing with
It's a whole new definition.
Prohibition of discharges.
Isn't this inserting? Well, okay.
It has to do with ultimate responsibility. And so that section on line 35, that section 1707-050, ultimate responsibility, states that the standards set forth are minimum. It does not intend or imply the compliance, blah, blah, blah. So basically what this does is make it clear that the amendment is that the responsible, because it's titled ultimate responsibility, but it doesn't actually address who has ultimate responsibility. So what I want to do is clarify that the responsible party is actually the owner of the property where the discharge emanates.
And before we leave this page, Mr. Chair, back around line 30, that's where it says the authorized enforcement agency, but that's where I started to be confused. Who actually is the authorized enforcement agency? Is that DPW, and is that clear, or do we need to say that it is DPW in conjunction with other relevant? That was when that question came up to me.
Yeah, I think it's okay because it's defined on page 2, line 42 as employees or designees of the director. So I suppose the director, we could always expand that, but I suppose the director could just designate some other agency or staff, I suppose, as the particular designee.
Okay, I just thought I'd raise that.
But but I think that's a good question, something perhaps for the director to mull over if he wants to expand that or not. And number 4, Amendment 14, I ended up striking out because it's not needed after all. Number 15. Okay, this just would reference the Maryland Fertilizer Act because I believe, let's see, page 611, I think it deals with, it deals with watering. So types of discharges. So just to make sure that any kind of, well, again, this might be also a question for law office to see if it's worthwhile referencing any kind of applicable state. So to say that because sometimes you may actually have runoff that includes fertilizer or includes pesticides, but it may be permissible under state law if they're following the applicable Maryland Department of Agriculture pesticide regulations, or in this case, the Fertilizer Act. So, again, I don't know if it's absolutely needed, but that's, I think, something that may be considered.
Now, would that apply in an urban setting? I'm just asking. I'll take a look at it. It's a good point, but I'm just curious. Would that be, would the intent of this be more for the areas that are farming areas that are sort of have like protected farmlands as opposed to an urban area? The amount of fertilizer being discharged in say Annapolis is probably fairly small, I would think.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure regarding the Fertilizer Act in terms of what the threshold is that would trigger that. I mean, for the pesticide regulations, though, I mean, that's something that anybody who applies, any pesticide applicator be it a landscape company or even somebody for the city, frankly, has to be certified by MDA regulations and fill out those reports. I used to do that years ago. So that may be more applicable than the Fertilizer Act. I'd have to double check.
Okay. All right, I'll take a look at it. Thank you.
Okay.
But we do outlaw sale of phosphorus and nitrogen in the city, right?
Just phosphorus.
Phosphorus, all right.
Yeah, because that's what is often not needed, and it has a more severe impact on our waterways.
I guess one of the problems I have, sorry, one of the problems I guess with those is that I don't think that we have the means to enforce, like if someone were to use a phosphorus-based fertilizer, is that something that the county would enforce? I mean, or because I don't think the city has the ability to enforce that. We don't have the the technical ability to enforce that.
Well, we just have a ban on the sale. I don't think we have a ban on the use of.
On the use, okay.
Because sometimes there are completely legitimate reasons to, like if you're establishing a new lawn or something like that, phosphorus could be helpful. But I think, I mean, and part of my intention of bringing this up to include these references is that it would essentially exempt these discharges that are otherwise permissible and approved through these agencies. So, because the way it's worded, it doesn't really take that into consideration. So I guess the question would be, without this amended language, would it be considered an illicit discharge if somebody was applying pesticides with approval from MDA, following their standards? Would that be considered an illicit discharge under the current language? Right? Because or is it intended to be? Because I don't think it's necessarily intended to be considered an illicit discharge if it's otherwise permitted. But again, maybe we want to have more discussion about that.
Okay.
Page 17 is just a correction. Amendment 18 is a correction.
Mr. Chair, before we skip over, page 7 is where, for me, the notion of where are the fines first started to crop up. You mentioned it later on. You and I both picked up. I do think that we do need to be thinking about issuing fines for some of these violations, which would require that we do a resolution that establishes the fines and the amount of the fine and what section of the code they refer to. But anyway, you were getting ready to jump to page 9, which I'm ready for too. I just want to make sure we don't lose that notion of fines.
Yeah, that's actually it's the last item on my list, but we will get to it. So page 8, or sorry, amendment. Oh, I did 18. Amendment 19. Sorry, amendment 19, which is page 9, line 40. I was proposing to strike. So let's see, line 40. This is under water course protection, saying every person, basically talking about how people need to maintain water courses on their premises. And I think the intention of this is water courses. Think of a drainage ditch, something like that, which is meant to convey water. However, and so this excessive vegetation may have been the template that we followed, the model ordinance, but the model law. But I think my proposal is to remove it because, again, something I know we've been trying to do in the county is we've been trying to move away from, traditionally, and Director, I know you are already aware of much of this. I'm just, for my colleagues' sake, decades ago, the whole philosophy was, let's move water from point A to point B as quickly as possible. That's why they used to put in a lot of pipes, a lot of ditches just to convey the water as quick as they can. The problem with that, as we now know, is that prevents the water from filtering out any of the pollutants. It heats up the water. It causes a lot of erosion in the receiving waterways, the receiving streams. And so now the philosophy is you do everything you can to slow down the water, as long as it's not going to cause any kind of undue flooding. But you slow it down, allow it to infiltrate. And so my idea for proposing to remove this is that, well, sometimes we do have ditches that hold water and hold vegetation. And in many ways, it's a fine line between what's a ditch and what's an actual stream, biological stream. And vegetation is not always a bad thing. I think if it's really impeding the flow and causing flooding, then yes. But I think that could be covered, I think, as is pointed out by Alderman Arnett, covered elsewhere in this section. But I would just hate to be putting a requirement out there to remove something that could potentially be beneficial to our water quality.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll take a look at that.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, while we're on this section, this is where the concept of enforcement first came to my mind, because I have certainly with a lot of residents living on the water, but also a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of water courses like at St. Luke's Church where water is coming from other places down to the water. Are we again here relying on some sort of self-reporting or neighbor reporting to know that these kinds of problems are arising?
Well, it's a good question, and a good question, because I think, I think it could be both, right? I think sometimes these come in from complaints. As an example, we just had one in the county about some industrial facility that was dumping, I forget what the substance was, but it was a complaint to the county about illicit discharge coming from an industrial site. So you get them from complaints, but we also get them from inspection staff who specifically go out and inspect our infrastructure to see if there are illicit discharges or other maintenance that's required. So turning to the director, that's a good question for you. I think you touched on this earlier, but it sounds like we don't necessarily have specific staff dedicated, but we do have staff who do some of this in their everyday duties. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. They're not. They do some of this in their.
Okay. But there's kind of to connect other issues, Director. You mentioned possibly in the future proposing to create a new position for environmental compliance inspector, and to be frank, I actually have had that conversation. Alderman Arnett and I have had that conversation before. And we're also trying to contemplate what to propose for this year's budget. But that may actually be something that a more general, which I think was the original intention. You may not be aware, but the original intention of the environmental compliance inspector was to be kind of across the board generalist for, again, just environmental compliance. It's kind of been shoehorned into sediment control. But it may be worthwhile to open that back up to have that inspector position and do some of these duties as well into their everyday responsibility. Something for you to consider as well. I'd love to get your feedback at some point maybe during the budget deliberation.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And also obviously before that, if you think that's a good approach to take or not in terms of advocating for more resources.
Okay.
Okay, so amendment number 20, which is page 10, line 46. And so this whole section has to deal with enforcement. And line 46. So what I'm proposing here is to be making entirely, so under this section of enforcement, you have two sections, A and B. I'm proposing to make a new B and just shift the other one down to become, so I'm not striking anything, but creating a whole new section that would be dealing with fines and penalties. And because I know we talk a lot about violations and remediation, in the legislation, but it doesn't really talk about fines and penalties. And so the language would basically just say that fines shall be issued if an illicit discharge, or in this case, illegal discharge, involves some kind of deliberate action. I'm not sure that's the best wording, but I think if at least I'll just at least explain myself to see if you can understand the direction I'm going in, if you have something better to propose in the future. But my intention is to say, and then also say, otherwise, a fine shall be at the discretion of the authorized enforcement agency. So my intention is to basically compel a fine if it's truly determined, if it's a deliberate action. But what I mean by that, what I have in mind is something in the case of, somebody goes and dumps a bunch of coal tar into a stream, or into a storm drain, I should say, that would obviously be considered, and it gets washed in by the stormwater. That would be considered an illicit discharge, if I'm not mistaken. And it seems like something like that should be finable. Besides just remediated, it should also be finable. But if it's not something where there's clear deliberate action, then it still just leaves it up to the discretion of the authorized enforcement agency. And it also states that it clarifies that a fine could be issued on a daily basis. But again, that's at the discretion of the agency.
Okay. I mean, it looks okay. I mean, in general, I don't see, nothing really leaps out as being really wrong with it. It looks good.
And amendment number 21, I know we only have a few minutes left. So this is kind of a question for a law office. If you could just, the wording was a little odd to me. I just want to see if this complies with Maryland Administrative Procedures Act in terms of if it's a final decision, if it constitutes a final decision, and whose decision constitutes that, and if we need to state any kind of appeals procedures, that kind of thing.
Alderman Savage, I'm guessing it's been a while since I've looked at this legislation, to be honest, but we took it as a template from the state. So I'm assuming this is their wording, which means I would think it would be compliant, but I can do a double check on it.
Okay.
While you're doing that, why is this going to the city manager and not the Building Board of Appeals? And why is it that the city manager's decision is final? Isn't there an option to be able to go from whoever makes this decision to circuit court?
Well, yes. Well, the reason it probably doesn't go to the Building Board of Appeals is because it would fall under the Maryland Administrative Procedures, which would take it a different route. Because this is state templated language that we're using, they wouldn't consider sort of an internal appeals process. They would consider an appeals process to one person internally and then move through. But it's been a while since I've looked. When we initially drafted all this legislation, I feel like it's been at least a year, maybe not quite. So I will check all of that. But that's probably why it's not going through an internal appeals process. They're assuming it's going to kick over to the state sort of outlined process.
But the city manager is an internal appeal process.
You always have to have someone within the jurisdiction who's making a final decision. Usually it's not the elected official. It's usually not like the mayor or the county executive. But usually it's, for lack of a better word, sort of the chief operating position, which would be the city manager.
Okay.
Obviously I'm sure we have a little latitude with that, and I'll look at all of it again, but that's probably how it was set out.
The nice thing about the Building Board of Appeals is it's multiple people. They have rules, they should have rules and procedures, and it's also a public hearing process. So that's why when I saw this immediately, I thought, I really think we should get rid of the Building Board of Appeals and just have the Board of Appeals handle everything. But if we're going to have a Building Board of Appeals, it does seem that would be an appropriate place to go if state law would allow that.
I will take a look.
Thank you, Ms. Leonard. And because it does seem a lot odd. Usually I think the directors are listed as the ultimate decision makers for, I know in like the Title 22 for forest conservation, or 21. But in any case, and also as the director's well aware, sometimes the state model language doesn't always make sense. You know, we've had a lot of problems with the sediment control laws. It's not always very clear. So, all right, moving on. 22 is a correction. 23 is another question for law office. It's not really too substantive, just to kind of if you could take a look at that. And 24, I guess, also is for law, is that what Alderman Arnett mentioned earlier, this is the last one, is it seems like we should have an accompanying resolution establishing a fine, especially if well, even without the one amendment, if that passes, where I propose to outline pretty clearly the fine process. But I think in general, if there are violations listed, we need to have an associated fine somewhere.
And my question I would add is, since this is new work for the department, are there any fees we should be charging?
Oh, yeah.
Or should this be a tap in the quarterly, what's it called now, the restoration fee in the quarterly water and sewer bill? I mean, again, I just don't think these things happen without cost to the department. And if those are costs that we can pass on in some way to applicants or any other place, I think we ought to be thinking about that.
All right, I'm getting a 4:30 reminder. So if we could just get somebody to look at if we need an associated resolution for fines, and regarding the fees question, that's a very good one. And just and Julian, could you bring us back to the panel view regarding fees, just for the director's sake? That is also something that I've been considering. Is if we do go the direction of wanting to add staff, we should look at increasing the fees, because we increased them last year, the year before, because when you looked at it, the department did an analysis and the fees were not covering staff costs in terms of the grading permit process. But I think we need to look at it for the sediment control process as well. Maybe we need to require fees during I know the inspectors do routine inspections all the time, but there are milestone inspections. You know, the inspections listed in the plans where it says you can't progress to the next phase until you get inspected and approved by the department. Maybe those milestone inspections need to have a fee associated with them to help pay for this stuff, because there's really not much of an appetite to increase taxes or to make cuts. So the best way to do that is to help get fees that are targeted. They're not going to the general public. They're going towards the direct user who's benefiting from the service, or the direct user who we have to do enforcement on, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Phil.
Okay. So 431, any other, so basically we're not going to take action on this. We'll just leave it open for the next meeting, if that's okay with everybody on the committee. All right. Anything else? And thank you. Director has been very helpful, and great to have you here contributing. Thank you, Ms. Leonard, for your contributions, and everyone else, Ms. Guild. Is there anything else? I'm sorry, Ms. Guild and Ms. Hodo, we don't have time to get a report from either of you today. If you could email anything you have, but we'll be meeting again in 3 weeks. Is there anything else really quickly before we
Well, I think this is really a great piece of legislation. I want to thank everybody for their work. I do want to point out, though, that it didn't interest Karma because she's gone.
All right, anything else from the attendees?
Alderman Savage and other committee members, just let you know, I know the county has been asking questions about the Parkside Preserve site, and I am forwarding them the inspection report and field correction notices and citations, and letting them know other information about it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I meant to bring that up, so thank you. Because
we adjourn.
All right, anything? All right, well, anything else for good of the order? Okay, all right. I'll second that motion to adjourn, just for the sake of speed here. All right. All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I'm going to take that. Alderwoman, you're muted, but I think that was an aye.
That was an aye. Sorry. I didn't realize I was muted.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you all, and have a good evening. And again, welcome aboard, Alderwoman Meissen.